it's Reija and welcome to another video. Today I'm here to do the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag, and this was originally created by The Book Pusher, but I was tagged by Anita Reads, and I think that this tag sounded super interesting. It's kind of like those Get to Know a Reader or Get to Know the Booktuber type of tags, but like focused more on the actual genre of fantasy and like content creation based on fantasy books, which you know I am very much about. Fantasy is my go-to genre. So without further ado, let's get started. What is your fantasy origin story? How you came to read your first fantasy novel? So my fantasy origin story is kind of like a three-part phase situation. So I used to read a lot of like contemporary and historical type of like middle grade, you know, books by Annie Swan and Astrid Lindgren. Those were like my childhood books. But like my first sort of more fantastical books that I read were The Brothers Lionheart by Astrid Lindgren and Ronja the Robber's Daughter. And then through that, in elementary school, I read The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. And those were kind of the three OG fantastic stories that I read. And then came Harry Potter. And I read those, but they were kind of like in this bubble of reading stories that had fantastical elements, but I wasn't really fully immersed into like the whole of fantasy genre or anything. Those were just books that I kind of read in between reading contemporary and books about, you know, real life issues and books targeted towards girls and horse books. I read so many horse books, and specifically there was this one author who wrote like mysteries, like close circle mysteries featuring a certain like horse like riding stable, and that was the premise. Like each of these mysteries would it was kind of like reminiscent of Nancy Drew but with horses, and it was great. Like if you are Finnish, you probably know that series. But yeah, like Harry Potter was the first big one, but I would say that my fantasy origin story started when I went on a language course in Austria because I was studying German, and I was 14 years old, and I spent 2 months in Austria in a language course, and I met some people, and we were on a train from Salzburg to Vienna. And we were talking about books that we had read as a group of girls, and then one of my friends mentioned that she had read David Eddings. And I was like, ooh, I need to read David Eddings. That sounds interesting. And I did, and David Eddings was definitely the first like fantasy author that I read all of his books. And now, as an adult, I know that David Eddings is not the best author out there, and also he wasn't the best person. Never meet your heroes. If you could be the hero in a fantasy novel, who would be the author, and what's one trope you'd insist be in the story? Currently, I would definitely want to be in a story written by Anna-Marie McLemore, because they have the most poetic, vivid writing style out there, and they also write really interesting and gripping characters. And they also write stories with one of my favorite tropes, and one of the tropes that I feel like encompasses my lived experience, and that is found family. And if I were a hero or a heroine in a fantasy book, I would want to be in a sort of fabulist magical realism type story with a found family trope in it. So yeah, that's my answer. What is a fantasy you've read this year that you want more people to read? Fantasy I've read this year? I feel like I have read very little actual fantasy. What would be one? Oh! Yes. Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko. That book was mesmerizing, it was thoughtful, it was gripping, it was uncomfortable, it made me feel all sorts of emotions, and I thought that it was beautiful. I made a full review of it, which you can check in the cards. And yeah, that is a book that I just want to talk about. I want more books by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko, and yeah, if you are into like translated fiction and more like sort of very urban fantasy with like how to even describe it? Like Vita Nostra is an urban fantasy set in Eastern Europe in sort of like a weird timey-wimey kind of modern times, but it also plays with dimensions and alternate realities and alternative ways of existing. So yeah, and it's sort of like that dark academia type of story. So I would definitely say that that's the one that I would want more people to read and more people to talk about. What is your favorite fantasy subgenre and what subgenre have you not read much from? Okay, so I kind of went into my favorite subgenre a little bit, so that's like magical realism, fabulist type stories that may or may not take place in the real world. But another one would be Fantasy of Manners. Fantasy of Manners, books like Swords Point, like sort of kind of books like Goblin Emperor is also kind of like a Fantasy of Manners because it doesn't have like super many like magical elements and it's more about politics and intrigue and like people commingling and coexisting, like that type of fantasy. I like intrigue, I like interpersonal relationship, I like fantasy that is very character focused. So in that sense, I feel like Fantasy of Manners usually gives me all of those things. So yeah, that's my favorite subgenre. A subgenre that I haven't read much from would be grimdark. I have read some, like Mark Lawrence. You could argue that George R.R. Martin also writes grimdark, like Game of Thrones and all of the rest of the Song of Ice and Fire books, but I've always categorized those as like epic political fantasy. Like they are not as grimdark as people make them out to be. I think they are more hopeful than people give them credit for. So yeah, grimdark is definitely something that I normally don't gravitate towards just because I don't want to be depressed. I'm depressed enough as it is and anxious enough as it is, so I don't need to get even more anxious by reading about very terrible people doing very terrible things. So yeah, that's my answer. Who is one of your autobuy fantasy authors? N.K. Jemisin, Catherine Addison or Sarah Monette, and Ellen Kushner. Who else? Who else would be up there? Ken Liu is also kind of in there. Like, I have not read anything else by him except The Dandelion Dynasty, but those books are so good that I'm kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt that he can write anything and I can, take my money, essentially. But yeah, Ellen Kushner, N.K. Jemisin, Catherine Addison, and Ken Liu. Those 4 are definitely my autobuy authors at this point in time. But, you know, that list is sort of ever-changing. I'm always discovering new authors and always expanding my horizons, so to speak. How do you typically find fantasy recommendations? Through BookTube. Like, before BookTube, there was this thing that I used called LiveJournal. And I followed a bunch of authors in LiveJournal. Like, Sarah Monette, for example, I found through sheer coincidence by Google. And then it took me to her website, where I then read the first 2 chapters of, like was it Virtu? Yes, which is the second book in the Doctrine of Labyrinth series. And then I bought the whole, like there were 2 books out at the time, and then I bought the rest of them as they were coming out, and then I basically have been buying everything she has put out ever since. But yeah, that, like, random Googling led me to her LiveJournal, where I started following a bunch of other people. Like, I started following George R.R. Martin, I started following a bunch of other people, because back then I think almost everyone had a LiveJournal account. Like those were the times. LiveJournal was... I would say that LiveJournal is probably... like, it was the proto-Tumblr. Yeah. And it was... There were so many messy dramas in LiveJournal, but yeah, that's where I got most of my recommendations from. And then I kind of branched out into Library Thing, and I followed a bunch of people on, like, Library Thing, but Library Thing isn't like a website or a thing for, like, recommendations. It's mostly for cataloging your own collection. And through that, I kind of ended on Goodreads, and then I made an account on Goodreads, and then forgot about it for the next, like, 4 years, and then through, like, Hugo Awards, Sad Puppies shenanigans, I sort of kind of ventured into BookTube, and, like, it was this whole rabbit hole, and now I get most of my recommendations from BookTube. Yeah, that was a whole, like, addendum story time. Internet is weird. What is an upcoming fantasy release you're excited for? Okay, so I have 2 things pre-ordered now. I have the new Catherine Addison that's currently being mailed to me as we speak, I hope. I hope it comes in next week. And then I have Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse pre-ordered. The cover art is by John Picasso. It looks amazing. I wasn't the biggest fan of Trail of Lightning. I still liked it, but I wasn't, like, the hugest of fans. But I have liked Rebecca Roanhorse's short story that she did, like the Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience, which was great. And I'm eager to see what kind of other things she will write, and I feel like Black Sun will be more like an epic, whereas Trail of Lightning is more like an urban post-apocalyptic fantasy. So yeah, I'm excited. Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse is definitely my number 1 anticipated fantasy book for this year. What is one misconception about fantasy you would like to lay to rest? One of the things that annoys me is when anyone says that fantasy can't be literary, or that fantasy can't explore themes of substance. I feel like sometimes people are like, yeah, fantasy, genre fiction, it's just tits and dragons, and, like, they treat it like it's for children or people who don't appreciate art. And I find that really annoying, because, like, fantasy can explore all of the same things as literary fiction does, with the benefit of having dragons and magic and magical elements. Like, before I got into my feelings and the whole rant, my camera decided to cut me off. So I took a little bit of a break to get my feelings across properly. And I will still say that fantasy and genre fiction can do all of the same things as literary fiction can. All of your daddy issues and all of your alcohol-ridden, like, adulteries and stuff can be done in genre fiction as well. So don't be afraid to dip your toes into genre fiction. You are not less intelligent or less analytical of a person if you read genre fiction. And that is a hill that I will die on. Okay? Moving on. If someone had never read a fantasy before and asked you to recommend the first 3 books that come to mind as places to start, what would those recommendations be? First off, I will say that I hate this question, or rather the way that it is worded, because I personally do not believe in universal reading lists or universal recommendations for readers, like especially with fantasy, because fantasy is such an encompassive genre with various things, like things like Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, Dandelion Dynasty are all in the vein of high and epic fantasy, but they couldn't be more different from each other. Then you have things like Swords Point, which is fantasy, a secondary world fantasy, but it also is so far removed from the books that I just mentioned that, like, you could not recommend these in the same sentence. So my approach would be to ask the person, what stories do you like? What elements in a given story make you tick? What kind of things do you look for in books, in stories in general? And then I would go from that answer and recommend books based on that. For example, if you wanted a fantasy that has strong female leads, is genre bending and explores themes of social justice issues, I would say you might want to try Broken Earth trilogy, but you might also want to try Trail of Lightning, or you might also want to try... There are so many I could recommend. You might also want to try something from Ursula K. Le Guin, for example, the... Blanking on the name... Earthsea series. Like, those are all fantasy, they all kind of encompass the same themes, well, except Earthsea, it doesn't have a female lead, as at least not in the first books. Anyway, I'm getting distracted here. Yeah, I would just go off based on the answers to those prompting questions. I don't, because kind of giving someone, these are the 3 definite things that you need to read to get into fantasy and to understand fantasy is the first, first mistake that you can do to a person, to kind of alienate them from fantasy, or from exploring fantasy further, you know? So, yeah, I would just say that there is no such thing as 3 books that I would recommend to everyone, because I would recommend, for 3 different readers, I would probably recommend 3 different sets of books, you know? So yeah, that's my answer. And the final question, who is the most recent fantasy reading content creator you came across that you'd like to shout out? Okay, I will say that because of my camera cut out, I was able to go back and actually look at my subscription list and give you a more coherent answer than what I originally said. So I have 4 people I would like to recommend because I think that they deserve more subscribers, and they are very focused on reading like fantasy and thoughtful analysis. So first is Books Rebound. I found them through Ashley from Don't Have a Degree in Reading because we were co-hosting the one readathon to rule them all. And he reads such a varied selection of fantasy, does reviews, his upload schedule is sometimes a little sporadic, but I think that what he delivers in content and thoughtful analysis and reviews makes up for the fact that I only see his videos in my subscription feed once in a blue moon. But in any case, I still love his content, and he did a very fantastic review of Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko, which I already talked about a little, and he also did an excellent video on The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan, and also like looking at fantasy that explores like similar themes as video games or fantasy video games. So yeah, I would definitely recommend Books Rebound. And then I have Kayla from Crack Into a Good Book. Kayla reads a lot. Like, a lot. Like, I can't keep up. She is a machine when it comes to reading. And I, like, tend to read, like, a little sliver of the amount of categories that she reads from. But I love watching her videos. She does, like, videos on urban fantasy, like, so you want to read urban fantasy, and she goes through different themes and characters and character archetypes in those books, and then gives you recommendations based on any given theme that she's exploring, and they are fantastic. I probably won't ever be reading any urban fantasy, but I still watch all of those videos because they are entertaining and let me have new books on my radar, so that's interesting. And also Kayla is super funny and like a lovely person. So yeah, I would definitely go check her out. And then I have Nur Chaos. He is a German booktuber, and he booktubes in German and has English subtitles for all his videos, so go check him out and give him some love. And he did a fantastic review of Broken Earth trilogy, and specifically looking at the themes of gender and gender identity in the Broken Earth trilogy, which was fantastic, so I would definitely go check him out. He reads a lot of other things than fantasy. He reads non-fiction and stuff, but he has such thoughtful content that, like, yeah, he can't be contained in a single box. He contains multitudes, and yeah, I would highly recommend his channel. And lastly, I would want to recommend Reads with Kesara. She reads a ton of fantasy from different demographics, like YA, adults. I'm not sure if she reads a lot of middle grade, but at least she reads like young adult and adult fantasy. And she reads like epic fantasy, high fantasy, low fantasy, you name it. And she's always very enthusiastic about what she reads. Like, even when she talks about books that I have no intention of reading, her enthusiasm and excitement about the things she reads kind of makes me excited and hyped up. Even though I'm like, yeah, that's a book that's definitely not for me. But I think that's also like something that I find that I value in the content creators that I watch, is that they sort of broaden my horizons and make me examine the things that I enjoy and stuff, and make me want to explore things outside my comfort zone. So yeah, I will leave all of their channels linked down in the description, so please be sure to check them out. And there you have it. This was the Get to Know a Fantasy Reader tag. I hope you liked all of my little story times and incoherent thoughts and stuff. Thank you, Anita, for tagging me. And if you made it this far in the video, please leave me a unicorn emoji down in the description so I know you were here. And yeah, I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye!